Welcome to Family Matters, Legal Edition, a special monthly segment of the Business of Family podcast. I'm Tammy Buss, family business advisor and founder of Blue Roots.
And I'm Yola Ventresca, managing partner at Lerners LLP. Together, we're diving into the legal issues that impact family businesses, from succession and shareholder agreements to conflict resolution and governance.
Whether you're in the founder's seat, part of the next generation, or advising a family-run company, this series is here to help you navigate the legal side of legacy with clarity and confidence.
Join us every third Tuesday of the month for real talk, real stories, and practical legal insights.
Because in family business, the law isn't just about protecting assets, it's about protecting relationships.
So welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Business of Family podcast, Family Matters Legal Edition. Our episode today is called Who Owns What? In Untangling Ownership versus Control. I'm joined again by my terrific co-host, Tammy Buss. And I am very excited to welcome our guest today, Mark McAuley. Mark is my law partner at Lerners Law Firm here in London in our corporate law group, specializing in, among other things, shareholder disputes and the issues that we're going to be discussing today. So if you listen to this episode and you're having an issue that we've described, please do reach out to Mark. So Mark, I'm just to frame the discussion, many family businesses spend years focused on building the business, but very little time understanding who actually owns the business, who controls it, and what those differences mean for decision-making, succession planning, family harmony, and future transitions. So what we're going to do in this episode is explore the legal and practical distinctions between ownership and control, and why understanding both is critical for family enterprises. And I must say, from a legal perspective, ownership and control can be very different things. Someone may own shares without controlling decisions, while someone else may control the company without owning the majority of it. And today we're going to unpack those distinctions and why they matter.
So, you know what, this is really interesting, I find, this question about ownership and control, especially in family enterprises. Mm-hmm. It's there's a tendency to have those lines blurred. So I think that's one of the things that the toughest part is you have overlaid of your governance and corporate setup, you have family dynamics. Mm-hmm. And so where there might be, ownership in fact, which in law we really care about who holds the shares, who owns the voting shares, who holds the non-voting shares. If you hold voting shares, what kind of decisions can you make? There's a lot of options in here. You get lost in the options that you can have.
And I think that's part of the problem, right? That's
part of the problem. But then there's the dynamic. If it's a company started by mom always made the decision. So does it matter if she's the one who holds all the shares or if she's just the director or officer? I suppose those are things that you need to unpack. Mm-hmm. They're very rarely in play or important when everything is going fine.
Absolutely.
But
like most things.
Most things.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter when everything in the normal course, but it matters a lot in transitions, sales of the business, or financings, or when you're scaling, or, when mom is ready to step back, what do you do? Right? So I think, importantly, let's make that separation first. You hold shares, you own the company. Mm-hmm. Let's start there. But from a day-to-day perspective, directors and officers, people who are empowered to make decisions, they're empowered by the shareholders to control it from day to day. Mm-hmm. Maybe once a year, the shareholders will get the opportunity to get rid of their directors and officers. Mm-hmm. Doesn't normally happen in a family.
It's very hard to make those changes in a family.
It's hard to make those changes in a family and then go back to the dinner table.
So how would you sort of break it down between ownership and control? If you were looking at this from a legal perspective.
From a legal perspective, the shareholders own the company. They have the ability to do things with the company. That would be the sale of the shares, of the assets, kind of like those types of decisions within a business. There's an exception to that. Like all things legal.
Yeah.
There's an exception to that that I can think of that we'll touch on in a bit. But then control might be the day-to-day operations, which we defer to our directors and officers to make.
Right.
We empower them to make the decisions that we're not going to make.
I love that because when we talk to families, we talk about from a governance perspective, that overlay of the family, the business, and the ownership. So for me, the ownership is that ownership circle, and the control is more from the business side of things,
right?
The day to day. And I think that they get kind of mixed in, because you hear a lot of times that somebody owns the company, but they're sort of retired, like a mom or a dad have sort of, maybe they've done a freeze or something and they have some shares, but they're still controlling the company, although they're not actively involved.
Yes.
Right? Which causes a bit of an issue from a family perspective.
Well, there can be tension in the family for sure, but there's also tax implications. But yeah, I think it's hard when you overlay family dynamics, because those rigid lines get blurred. Unless you're hiring a director or an officer who's not related to the family, which people do. Hire somebody who knows what they're doing, and they'll be a director, they'll be an officer, they might just be compensated as an employee or management. And then there's a separation between the family and the person who runs it. With a family, it's a little harder sometimes.
It's harder, and depending on how deep into the generation you are, founder, mom or dad, has done it all and never really distinguished them, right?
That's right. And then it's hard once you're being told to start drawing lines between, these various roles and stepping away from roles that you once did. I think some of the tension comes in, and that's where we seek out Tammy's advice. But so Mark, in terms of the shares, then, if we've defined shares in the way you have, what rights attach to shares? What rights do I have as a shareholder?
Let's start with the one that I think is most salient for people, is voting and non-voting.
Right.
Whether you get to vote on the matters with respect to the substantial matters with respect to the corporation. So you'll have non-voting shares, which could be common shares. It's also share in the value, whether it goes up or down in the company. Non-voting common shares, where you're still sharing in the value, whether it goes up and down in the company, but you don't get to make any decisions with respect to those shares. And then you just have, first you get to vote, you don't vote. And sometimes that's all that people care about. Well, then there's another category of shares where sometimes you get to vote, sometimes you don't get to vote. And they generally get to enjoy the residual value of the company. It's a better way to put it. I suppose it's always easier with like a pie chart or like a flow chart when you say, okay, and then when we're selling the company, these folks over here get first dibs on certain things, and these folks get first dibs on other things, and then the residual value goes to the people who are essentially holding the commons. But there's a lot of creativity. I think it's unfair to say that there's only 4 ways to do this, but there's a lot of creativity. Generally, you're thinking voting and non-voting.
Right. That sort of makes it simple, because I think what happens in a lot of cases is they don't know how to start structuring the company, because they're not willing to give up that ownership. But in some cases, they're thinking of control. And I think this is why it's a good idea to separate the ownership versus control, as the control being more the day-to-day, the ownership is, you actually own the company and you control it, but from a different perspective, from a governance on the ownership side, from the board level.
Right, and that happens, in the normal course at your annual meetings. Unless something major is happening, then once a year, the shareholders will get together, and they get to decide if they're happy the direction things are going, and they get to vote on the direction the company is going to go. Right. And so you do have control. It just isn't exercised every single day. It's exercised on an annual basis. And I think that's what matters the most to people. When it comes to transitions and when it comes to sales, you start to think more about those preference shares and the other special characteristics of the shares that might not get to participate in the voting side, but have other rights attached to them.
I think that's a hard thing to give up, either the ownership or control, because there's a couple of ways to do that, right? Like, you cannot have ownership but have control. You can have control and no ownership. So, I see that quite a bit when the company's been sold, say, to the next gen, but the founding gen is still wandering the halls making the decisions. So, you probably see this quite a bit.
Yes.
Right. So they come to you because of the ownership change, not necessarily the control change. Or do they think that's the control change?
They're conflated. They think it's the same.
Is that so?
Yeah. And we've had this discussion before. Making that distinction or like delineating those things is actually very difficult for people who've operated the entire time as if ownership and control are the same. So having this conversation about a transition, I have a family right now that's going through a shift from, it's a 50-50 second generation ownership piece here, but one is leaving and the other one's staying, but the first generation has a strong opinion about who should be in operation. And so you end up having this very strange dynamic about, the first generation actually no longer has control, de facto control of the corporation, but they are influencing the direction of the corporation.
Yes.
And so it's kind of hard, as one of my clients like to say, like, I have blood in the bricks. I built this.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah.
I built this, and it's like, yes, I do understand. You did sell it. Not that long. Not that long ago. So you did build it, but now it belongs to somebody else. You know, and they have to operate it in the way that they see fit.
So do you talk about that with your clients, about that ownership transition versus the control transition? Because again, you can give up that ownership, like you can sell it to your next gen, or you can keep it till you die and it transfers in your estate, right? But do you talk about that with your clients when they're talking about that transition and really the distinguishing part between that ownership and control?
All the time and constantly and actively, because I think that it's important for people to.
Do they get it?
I think they nod.
Yeah.
And then the assumption is, well, when the lawyer leaves the room, Dad's still going to be basically telling it, like, I still get to be in charge. And so we have to prime our clients for this.
Yeah.
Because they need to be prepared, for this. And it's always kind of like, it'll be reflected in the emails. I just want you to keep in mind, when this is wrapped, this is what the future state's going to look like. And that means Junior is going to have control over this, and Junior will be able to say this and the other. I just want to make sure everybody's comfortable with it. And they always say, yeah, of course. It'll be probably 18 months into the experiment where somebody comes back and says, I don't like the way that this is being operated.
Right.
And
this is what you signed up for.
This is what you signed up for. And we did talk about this, and it's important that you just get comfortable with it.
It's great to think about it. It's hard to execute.
Yeah. And I would assume then that from what I gather, Mark, and I've had a glimpse into this world that you operate in, but it very much is an iterative process to get people there.
Yes.
And I assume that you act not only as a lawyer, but as a counselor of sorts in terms of trying to prepare people for what's coming.
Yeah, and you would know, I mean, and I'm sure you do as well, I think that there's a fraction of our job, and it's not an insignificant fraction, where we're counseling people and getting them psychologically prepared for the thing that's about to happen.
Yeah.
And then you prime them for it. It doesn't mean they're going to be able to accept it wholesale, but at least they've been primed for it. We see this a lot, especially.
You need a long runway.
That's right.
And if people don't think about that, it's like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it now. But again, walking away from both sides is very difficult.
Yeah, I find it's very interesting when family businesses are sold to non-related parties, but there's a transition period where folks are still helping, working together, and hoping to preserve the goodwill with the customers and with clients, and sometime into that, I just don't like the way that they're talking to so and so. I don't like this new CRM that they put in place. What's a CRM anyways? And these kind of conversations, and I'm like, well, you did, you did sell it to them. I understand this is upsetting, but like, you did sell it to them, and we have to get comfortable with the fact that they're going to be operating it, or you can buy it back. You can buy it back, or you can just wait until your transition, is complete, and then
out of sight, out of mind.
No
contact.
Very, very easy for us to say.
What are some of the biggest mistakes you see regarding ownership and control when you're working on these types of files with folks?
Number one, no shareholder agreement. This is probably right now, the shareholder agreement's the biggest boogeyman. It's either no shareholder agreement or a shareholder agreement that doesn't contemplate very obvious things. So death would be an important one.
Dispute.
There's a couple that I have right now, and they are family enterprises, and it's
they're the worst ones.
It's the contribution. So it's in arm's length parties, we'll say something to the effect of, the shareholders agree to devote full time and energy. It's it seems like very how do I put this, squishy language. It's not usually very firm, but it's very useful when it comes time to say, well, Junior has spent exactly 10 days working on this business. Meanwhile, Gen 3 or whoever it has spent 355 days building the business. And, when we're trying to look at values and valuation and how to transition between I'm carrying the company versus I prefer to be carried, it's very difficult. So those are one of those examples that I always find very, very stressful, because now we're navigating interpersonal dynamics.
Yeah.
We have nothing to point to. We are relying strictly on people becoming reasonable. And often people can't rely on that.
Wow.
Can't rely on that, especially when they have a lifetime of other experiences bundled into that interaction with their sibling or their uncle or whoever the other person is. So shareholders agreements that's a big one.
Yeah, and you know what? You tend to have a shareholders agreement if you're going into partnership with a stranger.
Yeah.
Like a third party and non-related. But we always assume it's family. We don't need one. Or, I'm sure you've seen these too, where they're 20 or 30 years old that, when it was a startup, and it's changed since then.
Good fences make great neighbors.
Yes.
Yeah.
So as long as we have defined boundaries, and it's easier to do it when we're getting along. We have defined boundaries, and we know we've contemplated, what's going to happen, and if I pass away, what's going to happen with respect to the shares? Are they going to flow through my family? Are they going to go to my wife and then my kids, or do they get bought back by the company? Just the contemplation of the inflection points, just something that covers it off. It doesn't have to be an 80-page document, but it should be there.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you've seen this as well, where you've had a shareholder agreement that's quite old, maybe between two siblings, and they both have children now who are in the business. But the original shareholder agreement says that they're buying the other person's shares, leaving that other generation out. And it's like, was that your intention? Well, no, not anymore. But, you try to explain to them that this is a legal binding document. And if there is a dispute, you're going to go back to this document. So what have you found that sort of, common that comes back to bite them by not having an agreement in place?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what's the number one, Billboard Hot 100, thing. You said death. Death, any of the family law pieces.
Yes.
That's a really, really big one. What happens when generation 2 is in a relationship that dissolves? What happens to any shares in trust or any shares that are held by that person? Because chances are the core family doesn't want those shares to be held by
an ex-in-law. I've had that happen. Seen it happen.
I've had that a number of times, and now we're negotiating with somebody about getting back some shares who doesn't really care for any of the people who are remaining shareholders.
It's pure emotion now. There's no rational.
And as we had said before, there is a reason and there is a logic, but it is not necessarily reasonable or logical. And that's the thing that's kind of
that's true. Right? That's true.
Yeah. And the other thing, it seems to me, is that, because I have done some shareholder dispute work, so when things blow up on Mark's side, it gets over to me, and you realize that the way that the business was structured, children had shares, they might not have even known that they were shareholders.
Oh, I've seen that too.
and so you're starting from the ground where there hasn't been this real robust conversation about what the what the respective responsibilities are, what has even been put in place for the children, because maybe what was put in place happened when they were 10 and 12. I had that recently, and now they're coming to have an understanding of what is actually in place, and they're not happy with it. There's there's conflict between the siblings, and there's conflict between Gen 1 and Gen 2. So maybe for a long time they didn't do anything, and now they want to do things. And wanting to do things can cause problems.
Yeah, well, especially wanting to do things. Especially wanting to do things when maybe you're not suited to do things.
Yes.
Which is a really, and it's funny because there's fundamental tensions between I am a shareholder and I'm an owner. I should have a hand in steering this ship a little more because it's my value as well. I'm sorry, you don't have a driver's license, you can't drive this car. It's essentially, sometimes
Right,
versus somebody who's like, I have a driver's license, I want to drive the car. Why am I carrying all of this dead weight with all these other, and so it's those fundamental kind of, if I could summarize it crudely, that is that fundamental attention. I'm usually in the camp of one of those people. And so trying to advocate for somebody who, I can give you an example of something, and there's no names and nobody's going to be able to identify this, but the idea here, somebody who's buying out a sizable chunk of a family enterprise with the intention of owning it. But the children have inherited shares, or they had them in trust when they were children and they came of age, and they hold a chunk of this company. Now, the purchaser doesn't want to have to carry the kids along and is prepared to buy them out, but the kids are pretty happy not working and participating in the upside of the company.
They are.
Thrilled.
Wow.
Thrilled.
Shocking.
And so how do you navigate that, right?
Yeah.
How do we work on that? How do we convince folks to move on, or convince somebody to carry somebody along? And that's harder to do.
Well, and that comes back to, as a family and talking about what you want, because there's fair versus equal, and we get that a lot, that you have a sibling who is involved in one of the enterprises, running it, perhaps working, as you say, 80 hours a week, and the other one's not, and all of a sudden, I don't want to be growing this company for you when you're not participating. But there's a big distinction between a role that you're paid for within the company and then having the ownership of the dividend side. But so how do you deal with fair versus equal when your clients are talking to you?
Well, I, under my breath, like to note that that's not fair is something that my daughter says, and she's under 10 years old. So I'm like, it's, or my brother, who's also a transactional lawyer, says, well, fair is a place where people go to judge livestock. And that's not like really, right?
I had to think about that for a second. I'm like, yeah.
Right. That's not what we're talking about. And so I think it's funny because when you're navigating this, you do think about merit. It's hard to convince somebody who's inside working 20% of the time, reaping 50% of the benefits, that like you don't really merit that extra 30% that you're making. Or try to tell somebody who's carrying 80% of the company, unfortunately, there's no easy way to force this other person to also pick up a shovel or a hammer or whatever it is they need to do. And you can overlay on that, folks, when you say equal versus fair, what about, and I've had situations like this before, where there's a 50-50 divide, but the one person who's maybe not working as much actually needs the support of the family business. They are more needy than the person who is operating the business. And so there's another dynamic that's laid over, which is, well, would it be fair for mom or dad to cut that person off because they actually have a demonstrated need versus your, situation? And by the way, I'm not saying that's the right way to look at it.
Right.
But this is the lens that we're viewing this challenge through. There's being treated equal, and there's being treated equitably. And I think that's the one way to look at it.
Well, I come across this all the time, right? Because you always have, with a family business, not always, but a lot of times you have siblings in the business and siblings not in the business, right? So some of your family is, some of your family isn't. And, maybe one member of the family wants it to be fair, the other one wants it to be equal. And one of the things that we talk about is there any way to equalize it through using something other than the company? Right, than the operating company. So we're trying to look at the whole enterprise and distinguish it instead of taking it piece by piece. Like, okay, you get this fork, I get this fork, you get this, you get this part of the company, you get this. So trying to look at it from the three lenses of family, business, and ownership and say, well, is there something else that we can do?
Yeah, I mean, you could also do management bonuses. There are other ways to recognize increased or higher contributions, which I've seen people do before as well. Fine, 50-50 on a share sale, that's fine. On the ongoing day-to-day business, however, this person over here is getting a management bonus for putting in 80 hours a week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that seems to make sense. That's an equitable solution. Assuming that they're not already drawing salary, which they might. So there are other ways to do it that aren't just at the share level.
Yeah.
And maybe you can keep people satisfied for a while. All of that comes to a head when a transition takes place. So a sale of the business or transition in ownership.
And I think that, because we're talking about the actual business right now and the shareholder disputes and things like that, we tend to focus, or the family tends to focus on just the business. But one of the things I do like them to do is to look outside the business as well for other issues, because it's communication, right? It comes down to communication.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested in this idea of, ownership and, how ownership doesn't necessarily mean control. So, but what other mechanisms can influence control?
Oh, geez. Well, management, employment. I think, we can think about voting trusts. I mean, I alluded it to earlier, an exception to the kind of division between ownership and control. We could also have a unanimous shareholders agreement where we actually just collapse all of the kind of normal day-to-day controls into one layer and say, yes, there will be directors, but really only for the purpose of being the person who signs when a director needs to sign or an officer needs to sign. But ultimately, those decisions don't get made without the input of the shareholders. So there's ways to kind of collapse that in so we can actually have the operation and the governance be represented on paper in the way that it's done in real life.
So in the best case scenario, let's say someone's coming to you and they're being proactive, nothing has hit the fan, everybody's getting along, it's early in the business, they're going to get a shareholders agreement put together, and they are also going to turn their mind to governance structures.
Right.
Like this ideal client who has
perfect world.
What in terms of the governance mechanisms would you recommend there?
Okay.
Or does the governance, is there a particular type of governance or is any type of governance model better than nothing? Like, is that the answer?
Let's start with a plan is better than no plan.
Yeah.
A plan is better than no plan. And I think that I do actually strongly think that the division is very important between ownership and control. I think that people need to understand from the very beginning, we are going to hire, when I'm working with regulated professionals, for instance, if you have a very specified skill set, and that's, I say regulated professionals, dentists, doctors, lawyers, when you're saying like, this is how you should do this, hire somebody who knows how to run the company in the background, an office manager of some kind, defer some of the kind of crunchy day-to-day to somebody who's good at it.
Yeah.
Don't just assume that you should be the one doing that as well, because certain decisions that have a corporation or that come across your desk on a daily basis don't really need to be made by you. You don't need full control.
Right.
So I think in the very early days, you want to delegate the pieces, like the day-to-day kind of control and decisions, to somebody who is up to the task.
And I think that's a lot harder said than done, because when you're starting your business, at the beginning, you don't have the resources to do that or the need to have someone full time. But we're generally talking about businesses now that are transitioning, that are 30 years old or 40 years old. And sometimes going back to that same mindset of, we're just a little company now.
And we haven't even talked about stock option plans for those employees who are not related. So being able to somehow reward folks who have been also providing blood, sweat, and tears in a way that honors the position of the core family and doesn't necessarily dilute the kind of ownership holdings of the fam. Another option. There's so many options.
So so if someone were listening to this and saying, okay, well, alarms are going off in my head because I haven't done anything, and like this business,
or haven't looked at
I haven't looked at it, and I now maybe have to talk to Tammy, and I have to talk to Mark, what are the things that they should come ready to talk to you about?
Okay.
What should I have in my mind as agenda items for that conversation?
Okay, so the first thing before you put pen to paper on your agenda, to quote the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, don't panic. Don't panic. You want to consider current state, future state.
Yep.
What we do right now, where we hope to go. Let's call it 5 years. Let's call it 10 years. Let's call it wind up in the end, if there is a wind up at some point. Who does what? Mm-hmm. So get a good picture of who is actually doing what on a day-to-day basis. Who is responsible for this? Who's responsible for that? Start to think proactively about what it would look like if you wanted to sell the business. What it would look like to an outsider. It's hard to kind of shift perspective and say, okay, so Tammy does this on every day. Yola does this. Mark does this every day. Like, kind of when you spell that out, and then you kind of, this is the part that gets really contentious, which is how much is all of that worth?
Yes.
In quotes, like,
yes.
How much is all of this worth?
Yes, that can be very emotionally charged to think about.
Yeah, that's the one. So you can spell it all out, but then it's like, okay, so what are these contributions worth? And maybe we just say, you know what, it'll be equal right across the board, and then we'll deal with different share classes and dividends as people do more.
Mm-hmm. Right. Because you can always change them, right?
Yeah.
I think as people think is that once you set it up, you can never make any changes. But
no, you can make
lots of changes.
Yeah, it's, and I think the one of the most salient ones people always say, we want all to have the same shares. I'm like, you don't. You want to have similar classes of shares, A, B, C, and then we want to be able to dividend at different times because tax planning is different for everybody. And what Yola does in 1 year, if I'm doing absolutely nothing for 2 years and she's been doing something for for the last 2 years, it makes sense that she'd be able to get a dividend that would be able to equalize her contribution versus my contribution.
And I know a lot of times I've looked at shareholder agreements for clients, and they're asking about the shares because I think a lot of times they don't even know what they've done. It's like, I don't know why I've got all these shares or all these classes. So I want to talk about the classes. So why you've answered that one, why you should have. But the other thing is, do people, when they're starting out and they have their companies, really understand what a director is? When you fill in your paperwork, and so how do you sort of describe what a director is? On your shareholder registry and things like that. So.
Yeah.
Directors and officers, like, how do you describe that in a sort of layman's terms?
In a kind of like succinct way.
Because that's that ownership and then that control part. So maybe you can just describe.
Well, I talk to people about the board because people understand what a board is.
Yeah.
Right? They'll understand the board. And I'm like, yeah, because they've seen movies and television shows where
Succession.
where people sit in a room and the board makes a decision and not all those people are family. And so it's like, okay, so these are the folks who make these kind of day-to-day decisions. To be honest, officers, I don't know how frequently we require the president to opine on something. That may be controversial, but generally speaking, from day to day, we need somebody who is an authorized signatory. So I'm going to say the best way for me to kind of describe it to folks is when you go to the bank and they're going to ask you for things, they're going to ask you which person is permitted to sign for this, and that person is going to be probably the secretary treasurer. Mm-hmm. Why is the secretary treasurer supposed to do that? And then work backwards from the things that external parties are going to ask you for. And I think that's the part that people understand the most is you're doing all of these things to interact with the external business world in a way that the external business world will understand. It's not just going to be Tammy gets to sign because Tammy's in charge. Did we delegate that? Is she the person who does it every single day? Is she the secretary treasurer, which is what the bank needs? Is she a director, which is what that person needs over there? And then what are those roles? Like, what do they actually look like? And the board is the one that I say, generally day to day, those are the folks you're going to defer to.
Right.
If that makes sense.
It does. Okay, I'm going to ask you one rapid fire question.
Oh boy.
Because I think this is an important one. What's one thing founders should stop assuming?
Stop assuming that everybody at the table is in agreement.
Good.
Yeah, very, very insightful.
Yeah, everybody just looks around. They're like, yeah, we're going to be X. You were going to be the biggest software company in the world, and the person sitting next to them says, really? Because I thought we were going to be doing X. Stop assuming that everybody around the table agrees.
That's a good one.
I think that exercise you're talking about, that kind of what to do before you come to a corporate lawyer, is that exercise of sitting all the people down and saying, okay, so where are we going to be in 5 years? Where are we going to be in 10 years? It's easier to do when there's no value on the table, and much harder to do when there's a lot of value on the table.
Yeah.
So that one, don't presume everybody agrees.
Okay.
Not
a good life lesson.
Not a safe assumption that all the people that you're working with all agree.
Yeah.
Or know what you're talking about.
Or know exactly what you're talking about.
Well, thank you very much for coming
Thank you,
in.
Mark.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we
I
really
appreciate
enjoyed this.
it.
And this is really insightful. And for those of you listening, please do reach out to Mark if this resonated. And even if you're feeling a little uncomfortable and uncertain about what might be ahead, the earlier the better. And
don't panic.
Don't panic. Good advice.
And if you are
wherever
panicking,
live.
stop.
Don't panic.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening to Family Matters Legal Edition. We hope today's conversation gave you something to think about or talk about in your own family business.
If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who'd benefit from hearing it.
Have a legal question or topic you'd like us to cover in a future episode? Reach out. We'd love to hear from you.
Until next time, remember, in family business, what's legal is personal. Take care. The information shared in this podcast is for general educational purposes only and is not intended as legal advice. Listening to this podcast does not create a lawyer-client relationship. For advice specific to your situation, please consult a qualified legal professional.